Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to being well-informed. Today, we're really getting into some core ideas for anyone prepping for the CSWIP 3.1 Welding Inspector Exam. Our goal here is to properly unpack these topics, give you those aha moments, moving beyond just remembering answers to actually understanding why. So whether you're sharpening up or maybe seeing this for the first time, this deep dive should give you a solid edge.
Absolutely. And that understanding is, well, it's essential. The CSWIP 3.1 isn't just about recall. It tests your critical thinking for real-world scenarios. Knowing why something works or why a defect happens. That's what makes a competent inspector. We're going to look at some key questions today that really highlight those deeper principles.
Okay, sounds good. Let's get started with our first one, a classic, really, about fine-tuning things. When you're mag welding in dip transfer, that's the short-circuiting mode, what's the best way to cut down on spatter? Your options are A, using inductance, B, using 100% CO2, C, using argon plus 30% helium, or D, increasing the stick-out length.
Right. The correct answer here is A, using inductance.
Inductance, okay. Now, some people might just see spatter as, a bit messy, but why is it actually a big deal in mag welding, and why is inductance the key here for dip transfer?
That's a great point. Spatter isn't just messy, it's wasted metal. It means more cleanup time, and it can even affect things like paint sticking properly later on. The key thing with dip transfer or short circuiting is that the wire is constantly touching the weld pool and then breaking contact. Imagine trying to pull a drop of molten metal off the wire, but it just snaps off violently. That's kind of what happens without control. Inductance works like a shock absorber for the electricity. When that wire shorts out, the current wants to spike really fast. If it does, that sudden burst causes a sort of explosion of the molten droplet. That's your spatter. Adding inductance slows down how fast the current rises. It makes that pinch-off much smoother, much more controlled, turns the explosion into more of a gentle release.
Ah, okay, so it's managing that electrical surge. Makes sense. What about the other options then? Like, wouldn't changing the gas help? Maybe pure CO2?
Good question. Gas choice is important, definitely. But using 100% CO2 in dip transfer can actually make spatter worse. CO2 is reactive, you see. It gives a hotter, sort of less stable arc, higher voltage, which just makes that turbulent transfer even more turbulent. It's good for penetration, sure, but not for less spatter in this mode.
Okay. And the argon-helium mix?
That R plus 30% heal. That's usually for much harder processes. Think thicker materials, maybe non-ferrous metals, not really for reducing spatter in short arc.
Right. And the stick out? Increasing that?
Increasing the stick out length, the wire distance from the tip that can cause other problems like more resistance heating in the wire, maybe losing some gas shielding, arc instability, could actually add to the spatter problem. So yeah, inductance is really tailored for controlling that short circuit behavior.
That really clarifies it. It's all about that controlled break. Okay, let's switch gears. Something fundamental for quality assurance. BSEN 288 and BSEN ISO 15614. What are these specifications primarily for? Your choices. A, welder approval testing, B, welding equipment calibration, C, welding procedure approval, or D, consumables for sub-arc welding.
And the answer for this one is C, welding procedure approval.
Welding procedure approval. So the blueprints for the weld. Why is getting the procedure approved so critical for a job? What guarantee does that standard give you?
Well, it's all about consistency and reliability, isn't it? Think of a WPS, a welding procedure specification, like a detailed recipe for a specific weld. It lays out everything. Joint design, materials, filler, metal, gas, preheat, interpass temp, travel speed, volt, amps, and every single detail. These standards, BSEN 288, though it's mostly replaced by 15614 now, and BSEN ISO 13614, they are key for qualifying these recipes. Their purpose is to prove that if you follow this recipe exactly, the weld will consistently meet the required mechanical properties and quality. It's about proving the method works.
Right, before anyone even strikes an arc.
Exactly.
So it's not about the welder themselves, but the process being sound.
Precisely. Welder approval, that's option A, that's separate, very important, but separate. That tests if a welder can follow a qualified WPS. Equipment calibration. B, ensures your gear is accurate. Consumables. D, just one part of the recipe. The BSEN 15614 series ensures the whole approach, followed carefully, gives predictable quality results. It's fundamental QA.
Excellent distinction. Okay, let's move into NDT non-destructive testing. For gamma radiography on a steel weld, say 35 millimeters thick, which isotope is generally recommended? Options A, thulium 170, B, ytterbium 169, C, iridium 192, D, cobalt 60.
For 35 millimeter steel, the standard choice is C, iridium 192.
Iridium 192. Now, this is interesting. Why do you need different sources depending on the thickness? Isn't radiation just radiation?
If only it were that simple. You've hit a key point, though. Think about trying to see through something thick. A regular flashlight won't cut it for a brick wall, right? Gamma radiography uses radioactive isotopes emitting gamma rays high-energy radiation. These rays go through the material. Flaws inside, like cracks or voids, absorb or scatter them differently. That creates the image. The key thing is each isotope emits gamma rays at a specific energy level. Thicker stuff needs higher energy to get through properly and still give you a good picture. For steel, in that sort of 10 millimeter to 70 millimeter range, especially around 35 millimeter, or even 192 is the workhorse. Its energy level is just right, good penetration, but also good sensitivity to actually see the defects in those medium thicknesses.
Okay, so it's a balance. Strong enough to get through, but not so strong you lose the detail. What if someone uses the wrong one? Say, cobalt 60 on that 35 millimeter piece.
Right, common question. If you use something too weak, like thulium 170 or ytterbium 169, options A and B, better for really thin stuff, under 10 millimeters maybe. The rays just wouldn't get through 35 millimeters of steel well enough. The image would be useless, too light. On the flip side, cobalt 60, option D, that's for thick sections like 50 millimeters up to maybe 200 millimeters. Its energy is much higher. It would blast through 35 millimeters, yes, but the energy is too high. You'd get a very low contrast image, kind of washed out. You could easily miss smaller flaws. So matching the isotope energy to the thickness, absolutely critical for a reliable NDT result.
That makes perfect sense, optimizing the tool for the job. Okay, let's talk heat. Specifically, interpass temperature in welding. What happens if you exceed the maximum specified interpass temperature for a carbon manganese steel joint? Could it lead to A, excessive porosity, B, burn through, C, lower toughness, or D, higher strength?
The main concern here, the correct answer is C, lower toughness.
Lower toughness. Okay, that might seem a bit backward to some. More heat, maybe better fusion or something. Can you unpack why too much heat between passes actually makes CMN steel less tough?
Yeah, it does seem counterintuitive, but it's critical metallurgy. When welding, metal goes through intense heating and cooling. For CMN steels, the ideal microstructure is one with fine grains, think tiny, tightly packed crystals. This fine-grained structure gives steel its toughness, its ability to absorb energy without cracking. Now, if you go above the max interpass temperature, the weld metal in the HAZ, the heat-affected zone, stay hot for too long between passes. Or they cool down too slowly. The key takeaway, this prolonged heat and slow cooling lets the grains grow too big. Think of it like overcooking something. It can get tough or brittle. Here, the overcooking leads to coarser, larger grains. And larger grains mean the steel is inherently less tough, more brittle.
So it's not about visible flaws necessarily, but the internal structure changing for the worse because it didn't cool, right?
Exactly that. You want a reasonably fast cool rate to lock in that fine-grained structure. Exceeding the interpass temp prevents that. You get coarse grains, reduced toughness, makes the weld more prone to brittle fracture, especially if it gets hit suddenly. Porosity or burn through, A and B, they're usually tied to arc parameters or travel speed, not directly this interpass issue. And you definitely wouldn't expect higher strength. D grain growth usually hurts toughness without boosting strength, might even lower it slightly. So yeah, controlling that interpass temperature is vital for the final mechanical properties.
That's a really crucial point for inspectors. Okay, final question. Let's circle back to welding processes, dip transfer, or short-circuiting mode in MIG-MAG. What's its key characteristic? Is it A, giving deep penetration, B, being suitable for positional welding, C, giving low spatter, or D, giving high deposition?
The defining feature here is B, being suitable for positional welding.
Positional welding. Okay, so even though we talked about inductance reducing spatter, the main thing about dip transfer isn't necessarily low spatter itself, but that it works well in different positions. Interesting.
It is, and it connects back, doesn't it?
Yeah.
While you can control spatter with inductance, the basic nature of dip transfer is its very low heat input. And that low heat input is why it's so good for welding in all positions, vertical, overhead, horizontal. Because the metal transfers in those little short circuits, not a continuous hot stream, the weld puddle is small and manageable. Gravity doesn't pull it around so much. The welder can keep control, even fighting gravity overhead. It's perfect when you need that control, like for root passes or on thinner materials.
So it's the small, controllable puddle that lets you weld anywhere.
Exactly. If you look at the other options, deep penetration, A, or high deposition, D, those usually come with other transfer modes, like spray transfer. Those modes have much higher heat, bigger, runnier puddles. Very hard to control out of position. Dip transfer basically trades off some speed and penetration for that amazing positional versatility. That's its real strength. What a great run-through of some really essential CSWIP 3.1 concepts. We've touched on mag welding tweaks, vital procedure standards, NDT choices, and that critical heat control. Understanding these isn't just about the exam, is it? It's about ensuring quality and safety in the real world. Absolutely. And as we've gone through these, what really stands out, I think, is how everything in welding is connected. Every parameter, every standard, every test. They all play a part in the final weld's integrity. Which maybe leads to a final thought for you, the listener, to take away. How might just a small change, a small deviation in one part of a welding procedure, how could that ripple outwards and affect the final product's performance, its safety, maybe even how long it lasts?
That's a powerful question to keep in mind as you continue preparing. We really encourage you to review these points, keep asking why, and deepen that understanding. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive. We look forward to the next session in our CSWIP 3.1 exam prep series.